Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Sansa remained silent as she watched Maester Wilton splint and wrap Lord Umber's arm. She noted the fabric wrapped around his nose and ears for the minor frostbite. His entire back had to be a single bruise as well, just based on how hard he'd hit the wall. "He'll live." Wilton lifted a jar of cream. "You chose a poor day to antagonize our resident god." She spent the night holding that dying boy's hand, and she wasn't pleased by his death. Umber's voice was low. "I thought she was a witch." "Yes, you made that very clear." Sansa didn't even try to keep the bite out of her voice. The man's stupidity could have brought Winterfell down on their heads. "You will remain in your rooms, under guard, until I have ensured your presence won't get us all killed." Greatjon Umber didn't protest, just nodded. "Did you feel it in the air? The cold so intense it gave you frostbite and ensured the rest of us felt it to our bones." Sansa stared at him in disbelief. It hadn't been subtle. She'd felt the words stolen from her by the cold, the stupidity and danger occurring in front of her. The man shook his head. "The way the air weighed, it felt like I'd been blanketed under feet of snow." "Ha!" She'd felt a faint brush of vibrations when Daisy had used her powers before. "I recommend you remain here if you wish to avoid the guards preventing you from leaving." Umber winced as Wilton worked his shirt open enough for the deep purple bruising to be apparent. "I don't reckon I'll fare so well if I bother that god again." "No, I don't imagine you would." Sansa paused before leaving the room. "Get some rest." Umber bowed his head slightly with actual respect. "Aye, milady." She nodded and then swept out of the room. As she walked, she beckoned Podrick forward. "What news?" "Fitz found her holiness after some time in the storeroom. They came out. He escorted her to her quarters and left her there after some conversation. He's currently sat in a chair, guarding her rooms out in the hall and writing in his journal." Podrick shuffled slightly. Two of the men, Joran and Hogg, have joined him. Sansa thought through that as she continued to walk. It would seem allowing Fitz to follow Daisy had been the correct call. "Hopefully, inform me if that changes." Sansa's hands had a faint tremble to them as she sat in her solar not doing anything but sipping a goblet of wine. She hadn't realized just how comfortable she'd come to be around Daisy, the god in human form. It was ridiculous. She thought she'd had the god's measure, that she was likely a minor god of the sky, maybe of wind or air, a powerful being, but an understandable one. Now that had proved to be untrue. And somehow, she'd endeared herself to a being of that much power, enough that Lord Ember's stupidity hadn't gotten him killed. Because that had been clear. Ember's insults had not resulted in the death such comments should have earned because of her. Sansa had never met a royal who would have allowed a man to survive such comments. Far milder ones might have earned a man's tongue pulled from his mouth. But Umber had gone past that. And yet he lived because Daisy knew Sansa needed him. She ran her fingers through Ghost's fur. Sansa wished Jon was back. Once more she was on the knife's edge. Only this time there was nothing she could do until the god in her home emerged. She was relieved to be brought out of her thoughts by the door opening. Brienne stepped in, holding the door open. "My lady." Sansa straightened at the look on her sworn sword's face. She rose to her feet at the sight of the god. "Your holiness." "Please." "Right." Daisy winced, but walked into the room. She kept a carefully wider than usual berth from Sansa. It was... Sansa felt like frowning, if she wasn't better trained at controlling her expressions than she would have. "I apologize for Lord Umber's words. They were unforgivable. If..." She halted at the raised hand from Daisy. Daisy looked vaguely pained. "Please don't do that. You don't owe me an apology. I owe you one, really." She shuffled slightly. "I shouldn't have lost my temper like that." Sansa felt struck. Your displeasure was justified, and your mercy appreciated. If the god meant to apologize for some reason, Sansa wasn't going to miss the opportunity to hopefully ensure Lord Umber's continued survival. "I don't know how to make this right." Daisy stopped her movement as she reached the window, leaning against the wall beside it. Interestingly, it placed Ghost between them, cautiously her fingers threading through Ghost's fur. "You owe me nothing. You were insulted, having put up with a great deal of derision from Lord Umber since his arrival. I made him scared, and in doing so, I made you and everyone else scared." Daisy sighed. "It was petty and God." She brushed her hair aside. "Those titles were miserable. I don't even know why I did that." Sansa's heartbeat felt quickened. "Were they false?" "No, But ridiculous? Nobody calls me any of that except for the Quake, the destroyer of worlds part. Daisy looked desperately uncomfortable. Sansa stood and poured a second cup of wine and held it out. Well, to terrible days. Daisy let out a laugh and accepted the cup. I know it's 'cause your water isn't safe to drink, but damn, you drink so much alcohol. Just so much. She shook her head before downing the thing. Stepping to the side table, she refilled her cup. Downside of being me, I can't get drunk anymore. My first husband would have despaired with that gift. Sansa said wryly. Not that she allowed herself to become drunk, ever. She couldn't afford that weakness. Nor would she forget the danger she was in. Daisy paused, but then continued as if she hadn't stopped to look for something in Sansa before doing so. Never was one of my problems, apparently being terrible at apologies as though. She looked at her. I know what I said will have repercussions. What can I do to help? I'd prefer if the North remained undestroyed. Sansa hoped her tone came across light enough. It was hard to read this god. She held so much power, but seemed to care so little for it. Or perhaps it was merely that she was so far above it didn't matter to her. Daisy set her cup down. For what it's worth, I'm definitely not here to destroy this place. I'm gonna have to make sure everybody knows that, or things will be not great. That would be helpful. Sansa knew she wasn't alone in holding her breath to see what the god would do. She sighed. I'll take care of it. Daisy seemed to hesitate, before bowing her head to Sansa. And it was a bow, not a deep one, but a bow nonetheless. I am sorry. And Sansa had nothing to say to that. If there even was something to be said in the face of a god bowing to you with apologies that were unneeded and unrequired. But she was sure that in her own way, this god cared. About what exactly was still to be known. Lord Manderley stared at the man he'd ordered, brought to his room. Rickard Flint, he eyed the man. A limp, likely the only reason a man of his years had survived the War of 5 Kings. Well-groomed, if very northern. A 4th son of a 2nd son set to inherit nothing. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me before you swear your renewed loyalty to House Stark. Did you have something to say? I won't be your spy against House Stark. He pulled himself up as best he could, despite his cane. Manderley had picked well when he'd summoned this man to Winterfell. I wouldn't expect you to, but as the new Seneschal, I wanted to ensure you were aware of a few things. Shouldn't Lady Stark be informing me of the household? Rickard frowned. Manderley nodded. She will, but I thought it best to ensure you know a bit so you don't fuck it up. Lady Stark won't have a great deal of time for you. She's got armies to organize, miscarriages of justice to see to, winter stores to fill and trade to increase, and Lord Umber mucked up and is under guard in the Maester's wing. Then I'd be glad of your advice. Flint didn't need to say he'd take his own measure of his new position himself. Good head on the man. Manderley folded his hands over his stomach. Lady Stark hasn't had a seneschal since she took control of Winterfell. As such, the man doing most of the work is a Davith Bower. You'll learn many of the men, like him, are former men of the Boltons. Their loyalties are not entirely certain, but the last man to act against Lady Stark was frozen from the inside out by her holiness. Rickard's brow furrowed further. This god, she's real, unquestionably. Wyman Manderley had set his course. He was confident it was the right one. Leave the god to Lady Stark. She's got it well in hand. And let the direwolf do as it pleases. The man gave a considering nod. I'll do my best to ensure Winterfell runs as well as can be. Good! And if you require assistance, you can come to me. Wyman held the man's eyes. If he meant to support Sansa Stark, he needed the trust of her staff to the extent they didn't work against his access to the woman. Wyman was making his way along the wall to get a better vantage point on the work that was nearly done on the old broken tower, when he spotted the god sitting on the stone battlements, speaking with Lady Stark. It would seem he wasn't alone in his choice of activity. He gave an approving nod to the giant of a woman who served Lady Stark as a sworn sword, but made his way to the other 2 women. Bowing his head, he spoke. My lady, your holiness. Sup. Daisy, a baffling, ill-suited name for a destroyer of worlds and likely aspect of death, raised a hand in greeting. Lady Stark acknowledged him lightly. Taking a walk, Lord Manderley. Thought some air would do me good. He took in the tower. It was certainly in good shape. What are you planning on doing with the tower? Lady Stark's eyes tracked the workers completing the last of the work. The lower levels contain the arms and metal recovered from the Dreadfort. I've had the upper levels converted into barracks for the men. Surely Winterfell has more than enough room for the men. Wyman frowned. Even a large army would fit inside the ancient seat of House Stark. The god piped up, then. It's to avoid the men from becoming my men. Her mouth pinched to the side slightly. The ones who choose to follow me can do so, but best to keep them separate, some. And I get to make the training as miserable as I want to ensure most of the men don't choose to follow me. I'm sure that's the only reason you make them run for hours. Lady Stark replied dryly. The god laughed. Well, if I had to suffer through ops training, they can suffer through it. Sharing is caring and all that. She grinned. Reborn was baffled. It didn't help the men who'd been following the god ran past the outer wall. They were a clump of sweating and huffing men. Do you not wish for worship, your holiness? God, no. She blew out a breath, leaning back in clear distaste. It's Soup's weird people have, like, shrines of me, and I can't hear prayer, so it's not like worshipping me would do anything. It'd be useless. Lady Sansa spoke. Contain and focus to prevent uncontrollable religious issues. We do not need our own version of the faith militant. That, the god twisted the end of her braid between her fingers. Religious cults are crazy pants. And since I fucked up and everyone isn't assuming I'm some god of children or something, it's going to be a bigger problem than I was hoping. Wyman could sort of understand the meaning of the god's words, but they were baffling. He'd never heard crazy pants. What did that mean? Shockingly, Lady Stark didn't seem to be confused in the least. She was utterly unruffled, and yet you don't intend to stop playing with the children and watching babes. Lady Stark raised a single eyebrow as she glanced at the god. And the god just smiled, and it was kind in a way he wouldn't have expected of a god of destruction and ruin. No, I don't. But don't pretend you haven't already factored that into your plans for the future. I wouldn't dream of it. Lady Stark looked back to the tower. The smith said he'd mount a plaque over the entrance of the tower with your symbol. The god hummed. Yeah, I had to make matching brooches. Best to know which of the men are loyal to you and which are less so. Side note, you guys really care about your brooches. Like, I don't think I'd seen one on someone under the age of 70 before I got here. Her head tilted. I think it's the lack of capes. Wyman felt an idea begin to form in his mind as he listened to the god and Lady Stark conversing as if they were equals. Partners even. It was an unlikely idea. But one that, if true, would perhaps explain some of the god's more bizarre choices. He found himself focusing on how the god very clearly was open and leaning slightly towards Lady Stark, even if they were both looking out in the same direction. The good humor, it was impossible, and yet he was pulled sharply back into the conversation as Lady Stark spoke carefully on a topic he wouldn't have expected to be brought up so soon after recent events. Lord Umber, do you have any expectations of the man? Lady Sansa could have been asking about plans for the weather, save for a certain thread of care. The god groaned. Is he all right? He's recovering adequately. Lady Stark seemed to understand a further question. He has a cleanly broken arm, significant bruising along his back, and some minor frostbite. Maester Walken expects him to be recovered in a moon and a half's turn. Good. The god sighed, running a hand through her hair. Do I have to have expectations for the man, other than that he'll likely manage to say stupid things again, whether intentionally or unintentionally? Or should I apologize? The being grumbled the last bit. Clearly, distinctly unhappy at the thought of doing so, but shockingly apparently waiting for Lady Stark's opinion on her course of action. It was mystifying to witness. Lady Stark's only sign of surprise was to blink once. He insulted nearly every facet of your being. You don't owe him an apology. Certainly not on my account. Well, that's certainly something. Apologies to keep the peace are terrible. She paused. But really, do I have to do anything about him? Like I made my point already, didn't I? Lady Stark stared at the god for a long beat. You are unopposed to him returning to Winterfell at large. No punishment or censure. No, he can do what he wants. I won't promise not to break a finger or two if he tries to grab me or berate me again. But he's your lord. And the confusing thing was the god clearly didn't seem to care about the fate of Lord Umber. Oh, it was clear she didn't like the man, but other than dislike it, seemed the god was satisfied. Wyman finally spoke up again. That is most gracious of you. If he'd said any of that rubbish to my granddaughters, I'd have demanded satisfaction for it. He noted the slightly curious look on the god's face. A duel. He gave a rueful look at his stomach. One my son would need fight, but a fight nonetheless. There was a sudden near darkness in the god's voice. He understood in that one sound quite a lot. I apologize if I've brought up memories best left forgot. Lady Stark had the slightest flicker of curiosity, as she clearly picked up the implications a few seconds slower than him on the matter. Not that he'd have expected the lady to recognize signs of combat as quickly as a veteran like himself. Though she had, but the god clearly noticed the curiosity. I've fought many battles. I've yet to lose in the end. Her face was utterly sure. Not a flicker of even the possibility that she would lose someday. Merely that the battles would continue, endlessly ahead of her. Wyman gave a nod. Spoken as a true warrior, he considered the god. His thoughts were interrupted by the wheezing men running past their position down below once more. If I may, what is the purpose of that? Stamina, muscle growth, and dissuading any idiots from deciding to follow along in their choice to follow me instead of Lady Stark. The god eyed the men. Though they've had enough for today, she gave Lady Stark the faintest of bows, and then hopped off the battlements, dropping to the ground by the men. Wyman swallowed at that. His faint tickle of an idea was becoming more likely with every passing moment, and it was certainly something. Do you still wish to discuss your demands of House Dustin in light of Lord Omber's misstep? No. If Lord Omber's uncle arrives with my brother, there will be much to speak of. If not, other arrangements will need to be made. She turned her full attention to him. About my new Sensual, you have my thanks for seeing to my acquiring his services. Wyman bowed his head. It was nothing, my lady. Only what is due as your loyal bannerman. John ducked into the small command tent the men had put up. The cold rain had forced them to seek shelter. It was more sleet than rain, really. By morning it would likely be snow. He shook his hair free of the wet as he straightened. Lord Glover, Lawrence, he acknowledged the two men, or, well, man and boy who'd called him. Lord Glover pulled himself up. One of your parties of wildlings is late. We need to pursue them now, before they can do too much harm. Styrodroj is a strong man and has a poor sense of time. If he's not back with his men by sunrise, we'll send a scout to find them. We didn't free my land from Ironborn Reavers just to let wildlings pillage it, Glover glared. John was glad Tormund was busy trying out his new axe he'd liberated from the Ironborn. They have not acted against you or your people since they arrived. In fact, several have died to protect your lands. Until you have cause and not just suspicion, there will be no acting against them. Is that understood? You don't command me, boy, Glover growled. He stepped into the Lord's space. No, I don't, but Lady Stark does. Or do your oaths mean nothing to you? Glover ground his teeth as he considered it. Fine, be it on your head. I expect nothing else. John stood his ground. Glover glared and then brushed past him and out of the tent. Lawrence gave him a curious glance, but followed the man who'd raised him out of the tent. However, he did give John a nod of respect as he went. John's shoulders felt tired as he stood there. He was exhausted to the bone. His very soul was weary. A week of travel left, and he'd be home. It had to be enough. Maybe he'd take that god up on a few days to just sleep. Well, that could have gone better. Davis rolled up the map that'd been laid out. We'd best send someone out to make sure Styrod isn't doing anything stupid. John closed his eyes. Boxsharold is a ward. He'll find the men faster than anyone else. I'll see to it. Davos paused. He clapped John on the shoulder. And then John was alone. He pulled off his cloak and unbuckled his sword. A few hours' rest would prepare him for holding a wilding and northern force of men together for another day, and another, and another. All this petty bickering when they didn't have time for it, well, hopefully the sleep would help with his frustration as well as his exhaustion. A week till Winterfell, he longed for it. Greyjohn didn't let the looks of the men bother him as he walked out into the courtyard where the god was working with the men. He had no interest in hiding, waiting to see if this god had been sincere in her decision not to kill him. Best get it over with, one way or another. He stopped on the edge of the training men. The god noticed him and raised a brow. She didn't attack him, or appear particularly displeased. He strode over. So what do I call ya, since apparently I got that bit wrong? Daisy would work. She looked deeply unimpressed by him, her arms folded over her chest. He gave a nod. Weird name for a god. I wasn't aware babies pick their own names, Daisy replied dryly. Greyjohn laughed at that. Hey, there is that. Now that he was properly looking at the god, he noted bits he'd missed initially. Her eyes scar across one cheek, and the way she held herself. All screamed combat. It'd been stupid to miss that. Everything about her said she knew exactly how dangerous she was. A rare thing for a woman who wasn't a Mormont. Fight me. Wait. What? Daisy looked at him in visible confusion. Your arm is broken. I broke it. He unclasped his cloak and chucked it over a wooden sawhorse. I've got 2 arms, and can wield a sword better than any of these boys, even with only one of those arms. Surely you want more of a challenge than this lot can give you. She stared at him before shrugging. Fine, it's on your head if you break anything. She stepped to the weapons rack, easily showing him her back as she grabbed the shortest practice sword. The damn thing was one of the practice blades given to children in the hands of an adult, even a woman of this Daisy's stature. It was more of a long knife. He grabbed a proper sword. You sure you want that butter knife? I'm sure, and she turned to face him. Not a bit of doubt. And well, Umber felt his blood burn hot at the prospect of a fight. He didn't care for the alarm in the men's faces as this fight drew a crowd. He just saw the woman was ready and swung his sword. She caught the strike with her blade, and then she moved. Umber really didn't understand exactly what had happened. But she'd used her block to slide in close, and then the sky was above him, and his back was reminding him he was still very sore from getting chucked into a wall. He wheezed. Daisy was looking down at him with an amused expression. Doing okay down there. Well, damn. He heaved himself up from the ground. Picking up his sword, his eyes narrowed. So she was a wrestler. Letting her close was stupid then. He kept his pommel more centered as he swung this time. She caught his strikes, deflecting primarily with a strength that made his arm ache. Great John Umber knew he must look half feral as he tried as hard as he could to whack a god with a sword. She suddenly dropped, sweeping his legs out from under him. He hit the ground again, her sword to his throat. He grinned with his teeth. I yield. You're better with a sword than I am. She easily rose to her feet and offered him a hand. Umber chuckled as he took the hand, allowing her to heft him to his feet. A feat a woman of her size should not have been capable of. You're as strong as the bloody mountain, yeah, I know. I'm still adjusting to that. She rolled her arms as she returned to her starting pose. He snorted. A swordswoman she might not be, but she had the reflexes, strength and training in hand to compensate. I'll help your boys with their swords, and you if you want. You keep whacking at me like you're holding a bloody club. You're welcome to it. Gotta say, the sword thing is new to me. She spun the blade in her hand easily. Sword she might not know, but knives on the other hand, he'd eat his own arm if she wasn't well trained with knife work. Umber was sweating, sore and pleased as he dunked his head into a barrel of water. With a grunt, he lifted his now streaming face from the water. He shook his head, water flying. Laughing, he grabbed his cloak from where he'd laid it. So how do you plan to beat these boys into shape? I was trained as an assassin, and we didn't really use swords or spears or any of your weapons aside from knives. Daisy shrugged as she pulled on her white jacket covered in stitched red leaves. But archery has promise. I may not be completely adjusted to it yet, but another month or so, and I will be. Umber couldn't help raising his eyebrows. He'd seen the god shoot an arrow, and she was a damned good shot. I'll help you with the weapons training. Sounds fun. She looked at him curiously. You're an odd man next time you want a person to prove themselves to you, may I suggest, not insulting them. If you keep that up, you're going to run into someone who'll actually kill you. He slapped her on the shoulder with a laugh. Where's the fun in that? Side's best way to know a man's nature. Let me guess. It's the way of you northerners. Daisy shook her head, but didn't move away from him. Not that she had reason to. Woman could destroy him, powers or no powers. Umber chuckled. You understand then. I'm going to have to punch a lot of very stubborn idiots in the face. She rolled her eyes. He couldn't help but laughing uproariously. Spoken like a person who's punched a lot of men in the face. Your brand of stupidity isn't unique, Daisy replied. Umber liked this god. It helped that according to the boys, she didn't care much for any of the southern gods' nonsense. Also, the fact he hadn't been smited. That one helped a rather lot. Sansa stared at Bauer in disbelief. I'm sorry, Lord Umber is what? Attempting to outdrink her holiness, milady. The Master of Arms replied. He looked good, really. The relief at a proper seneschal, taking over the vast majority of the duties he'd been struggling under, had clearly done him good. But his improved demeanor didn't make the words coming from his mouth make any more sense. She registered Lord Manderley's focus, as well as her new sensual flints. She ignored it, however, as she processed the stupidity being reported to her. Explain. Well, see, that's the thing. Bauer turned his hat in his hands before him. This morning in the yard, Lord Umber approached Her Holiness. He challenged her to a spar, which she accepted after some words. It was impressive. They fought several rounds. He's offered to teach her and her men weapons, seeing as Her Holiness is unaccustomed to mortal weapons. He was impressed by her ability to whack him right round with almost no practical knowledge of the sword she was using. He proceeded to challenge her to see if she could drink as much as she could lift. And somehow that worked. Sansa had no words for that, but she had to have them. Where are they now? Wintertown, milady. Bower's cheeks heated slightly. The tavern, though once the panic inspired by Her Holiness showing up there, it's been very jovial. Sansa closed her eyes. She couldn't risk a drunk god and lure him into a tavern that was also a brothel, especially since she'd be footing the bill for any damages. However, sending servants out to fetch a god was standing. She remained as calm as possible. Fetch Brienne and 3 of the household guards as well, 6 horses. I'll meet them at the gates. She looked towards Lord Manderly. My apologies, we can continue the trade proposal after supper. My lord, of course, Manderly chuckled. Umber always was fond of his drink. She felt tight as she gave the man a slight nod. Your understanding is appreciated. Sansa left the room. If she had a possibly drunk god, she doubted that she could wrangle the woman on her own, or even know if she needed to intervene. There was also the chance the woman was perfectly sober. She had said drink didn't affect her. That wasn't something she was willing to count on. However, so she walked the walls of her home and into the workshop she'd set aside for her guest. Sansa noted out of the corner of her eye Cran Snow bowing as he noticed her. She focused on Fitz, however. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. Lady Stark, right? The man looked up from the table where he was twisting wires. Did you need something? She was unsure of what the various metal shapes he'd made were, but now wasn't the time for those questions. Her Holiness has gone into the local town and is engaging in a drinking contest. Should I be concerned? Whoa, what? Daisy doesn't just drink, really. He actually was paying her attention now, though his face was confused. Sansa responded carefully. I had been led to believe she was not affected by drink. Fitz's eyes suddenly widened in understanding.
Oh, we're right. She probably can't be anymore. That's why. She's always been careful about that. Losing sea control of her body means losing control of her powers. And then nobody wants earthquakes, 'cause she tripped or something. Sansa felt a pang of fear at that. You're sure she cannot become drunk? She's engaged in a drinking contest. I mean, Fitz frowned, his eyes seeming to glaze over, thoughts moving faster than he could speak. If she docked rank enough, it's probably possible. I doubt she's aware it's a per-PU possibility, though. Sansa swallowed. Right, well, that was terrible news. What type of drunk is she? Oh, nothing bad. Fitz stood up, wiping his greasy hands on a rag as he approached her. Bit giggly, really. He glanced at the door and then her. We're going to go pick her up before she can do something stupid like actually get Dr. drunk, though. Correct? Sansa weighed what she knew. This man had harmed Daisy. Daisy certainly never truly lowered her guard around him. However, she also clearly loved and cared for the man. I've had horses saddled. Fitz flinched. Horses, bloody posh people. Sansa raised a brow that had made no sense, and yet she had a feeling she understood completely. 10 minutes later, as she watched Fitz scrambling into the saddle like it was a pile of rocks and not a horse, she knew she'd been right. Sansa was looked on curiously as she made her way into the tavern attached to the town brothel. It was a location she'd never been to before, though she'd always been aware of it. Euan had certainly spoken of it often, and she'd been married to Tyrion. That wasn't even bringing up Pat Daenerys, which is to say she wasn't shocked or uncomfortable as she entered the warm building. It was in good repair. Of course, the various invaders had used the brothel and not burned it. She was vaguely amused by the shock as she was recognized, also relieved beyond measure at a still upright god. Lord Umber was leaning heavily on a man next to him and was visibly drunk, as were a few of the men. Daisy, however, simply looked like she found the whole thing hilarious. Sansa swept past the stuttering serving woman, who was assuredly also a whore for the table her men-at-arms, Umber and Daisy, had claimed. Your Holiness. Lady Stark, Daisy waved to the open chairs. Join us. Sansa sighed. That was a terrible idea, but it'd be rude to not accept. Not to mention if she and Wyman wrote another draft of a possible agreement with the Iron Bank only to scrap it after some thought. She was going to scream, I wasn't aware you knew where this establishment was. Great John here was very knowledgeable, and knowing the local bar or tavern or whatever's location is the fastest way to gather intelligence. Of course I knew where it was. Fitz dropped next to Daisy.
How much have you had? 26 pints, and I actually feel it a bit. Daisy reached out fondly, mussing his hair. Nothing more, he frowned, squinting at her face before leaning back. Well, that's all right, Dot, then. I'm not stupid, Fitz. She rolled her eyes and sat her own mug of ale in front of him. You clearly need this more than me. Fitz grumbled unhappily, but accepted the drink. Umber let out a belch before thumping his chest. I loved a woman once. Sansa barely kept from laughing, as she and Daisy caught eyes. She kept the laughter out of her voice as she replied to her very drunk lord. Your wife? Nah, he waved absently with a sort of wavering, sweeping motion. Not her. I can't follow her in the rebellion. Those were good days. We were all young and strong. Daisy's lips twitch. What sort of girl was she? She helped the injured, a healer. His gaze was wistful and unfocused. Frankly, his words were shockingly coherent, really. She loved me. Thought I'd bring her home. Sansa accepted this was how she'd be spending her afternoon as a mug of ale was set in front of her. What happened to her? A fever went around the camp after the trident. One day she was plump and happy, rosy cheeks and all. Next she was gone. He hiccuped. Daisy patted the lord's shoulder. I'm sorry. His eyes narrowed as he tried to focus on her. It happens. This one. He jerked his thumb towards Fitz. Said your lover died? Sansa held her breath at that, but there wasn't anger on Daisy's face at that. She just grabbed the fresh mug in front of her. His name was Lincoln. He healed people too. It was important to him even when his powers were so deadly. He controlled lightning. It was beautiful. She stared into the mug. He took my place and died. It wasn't supposed to be him. Fitz gave her the single most awkward shoulder pat in history. He was a good guy. He cleared his throat. My jam and I are cursed.
You're not cursed.
Daisy switched her mug with his now empty one. We'll get you back to her, she brightened. Maybe we can get you two married without having to keep a fear dimension nearly swallowing the world. She took a drink. You know, shit like that is why I think that Seven Hells thing here might have the right idea. Fitz's nose scrunched. Well, we know about two of them. Or I know of one, you two. He shook his head, eyes traveling to Sansa. Have you ever been in love? I thought I was once, but it was a silly dream of a stupid girl. Sansa took her own drink at that. The man Umber was leaning on spoke up. I loved a girl named Bess. Pretty as a picture. Won't marry me for anything either. Why not? Yaksa, strong lad. Umber leaned onto the poor man even more. He looked longingly across the room. I don't know. Sansa followed his gaze and spotted a pretty girl perched on a bearded farmer's lap. She bit back a laugh at the realization. That's unfortunate. Well, what are you doing here, man? Umber half fell off the man. Go woo, yar girl. He shoved the poor man off of his seat. Well, get on with ya. Poor man blinked, ran a hand through his hair, and then swaying, marched towards his one true love. It was like watching a wheelhouse crashing into a river. She let out a huff of laughter. What is his name? Creston, Daisy laughed into her own mug. She leaned closer to Sansa, her voice softer as Fitz and Umber began arguing about swords somehow. It's good for them to see you outside of Winterfell. Sansa's eyes sharpened. Excuse me? I can guess at why you came, but it's good you stayed. Her face said honesty, but faces could say a lot of things. Daisy continued. The people here need to see that their leader is alive and young, and one of them. Sansa's face had the slightest crinkle in her brow as she thought of that. It was a concept of leadership and power similar to Marjorie's. And yet, there was an idealism there that she hadn't considered anything but foolishness since those early days before. Just before. You believe in people. How? Because they'll surprise you. Daisy tapped her mug against Sansa's. For good or evil. Sansa's eyes turned back to where poor Creston was very clearly proposing marriage to the pretty whore. It did not seem to be going well based on the facial expressions. Poor Bess looked horrified and rather pitying as her customer she was sitting on the knee of looked disgruntled. I've found plenty of the latter. So have I. Daisy leaned back in her seat. The good is just usually smaller, hundreds of puzzle pieces working together for something better. I always thought that was beautiful. Sansa barely kept from snorting outright as Umber keeled over, half on the table. The snoring was rather assuring that he was alive and hadn't drunk himself to death. Do you think Creston over there has any hope? Not a chance in hell. Daisy's lips twitched. He's about to get slapped. And he definitely doesn't need another drink. Her own mouth curled slightly. No, I should think not. Jon sped up his horse as he spotted the banners ahead. Those were Umber banners. and that was a proper band of men marching towards Winterfell. Snow Tormund cursed as he kicked his heels in to follow, but that didn't matter. What mattered was there was no reason for Embermen to be this close to Winterfell, with enough men to fight, but not enough to conquer. Jon slowed his horse and then pulled up as he reached the men. His eyes caught the great giant of a man sitting at the head of the Ember party. The man had a great white beard, one eye, and the white pelt of a bear over his shoulders. A familiar man. Jon raised his voice. "Mors Amber, what brings you to Winterfell?" "Stark," the man barked, pulling up his own horse. "I didn't know the Starks had an army." His lip visibly curled at the sight of Tormund. Jon's face hardened. "Aye, the free folk fight for us and the living. Surely you know what's coming." "Others and the dead." Mors gave a nod. "I take it the Ironborn are gone?" Jane's hands tightened their grip on the reins. "Aye. Well, then I reckon I've got someone you want to see then," he yelled over his shoulder. "Bring the boy." Jon felt his heart in his throat. He knew it was a fool's hope, but it was there. His attention snapped to where there was movement, and it was the giant mass of fur that made him feel winded, because that was a dire wolf. Jon wasn't even aware that he was dismounting till his feet were on the ground, his mouth dry. And there was a woman beside the wolf. Her garb was familiar after so long among the free folk. There between her and the wolf was a lad. Tall, shaggy brown, curls with that particular auburn shade to them, long-faced, bright blue eyes wearing the stitched-together pelts of small game, just a wildling lad, if not for how every feature was a ghost of Robe, Sansa, Arya, Bran, father. Jon took a hesitant step forward, and then another, his voice hoarse with the weight of it. "Reckon." 5 great strides, and he had the boy in his arms, one hand clasping the back of his head, his other arm catching the boy around the back, holding him like he would turn to smoke and vanish if he let go of him. His eyes burned as he heard the small voice against his shoulder. "Jon?" Fitz trimmed the leather belt he was being forced to use for generating power. He was being slightly more careful now. The number of times he'd stabbed himself with wire had left him slightly wary as he used a sharp knife to trim the belt. Just making his own tools was ridiculous, abhorrent. He was having to work under these conditions. He carefully stopped and measured the width. "Does the exact width matter that much?" Daisy asked from where she was sitting on his work table and twisting the wires as instructed. Her enhanced strength was proving useful. He glared at her, missing the scandalized expression on his assistant's face. "I'm sorry, who's got a doctorate here?" "Fine." Daisy shrugged as she continued her work. "I still think you're maybe going a little crazy for what's legit. Small potatoes. Shit, that's cobbled together." Fitz's jaw ticked. "Were you always this annoying?" "It's a gift," Daisy winked. "Also, did no one read you the story of the rabbit and the turtle or whatever?" His spine straightened. "I'm not going to build an LMD. Not like I could anyways." Not the concern." Daisy pulled her legs up under her, folding them easily as she stayed sitting on the table. "But I'm concerned now." The assistant Snow spoke up cautiously. "Was an LMD." Fitz wasn't sure how to even begin to explain that to some poor peasant from the Dark Ages. Did the kid even know what a machine was? He looked at Daisy in confusion. Daisy sighed. "A person made of metal with a coating of a skin that leaves them appearing human. They're all destroyed." "Not my finest moment." Fitz stared at his hands. There'd been so much promise with that project, but he couldn't even think of trying to recover something usable without feeling sick at the thought. Not that anyone would let him. Maybe if he was in a proper lab, if Gemma was there to make sure it didn't go out of control. Snow's eyes widened. "You made people? Evil ones that had to be put down." Daisy clarified. He shifted. "They weren't inherently evil. Idea was, she was the worst. And you don't get to judge. I got stabbed and shot twice. Also the torture. Not a good idea, nerd." He dropped his hands onto his hips. She was a child. She didn't know any better, and considering how violent of a wood world we dropped her in, she was surprisingly stable. You know that makes it creepier, that you got it on with her. And again, she created hundreds of copies to murder us. Daisy had her "you're stupid" voice on. Fitz huffed. "Well, at least I didn't fuck a vengeance demon who was an adult and didn't try to kill us or conquer the world." He crossed his arms. "Ward and Miles." Rude, her face scrunched up. "And not fair, Ward turned out to be a traitorous asshole before we got together. Also, Savitzlana is alive, reasonably well-adjusted, and not a dick." He blinked. "Who?" "My ex-hot Russian hacker. That's the reason I know a bit of Russian. Does no one listen when I throw stuff out there?" It came up on that awful mission where Bobby and Hunter got caught. Daisy spread her hands in the universal gesture of keep up. Fitz tilted his head. Maybe stick to girls for a bit then. It might be safer for just everyone. Why in the world does Robbie bother you? Daisy tilted her head. He wanted to scream that she'd left them, hadn't wanted them, that everything that had gone wrong had started when she left. That she'd reached out to some murderous nobody and not the team, but the words just didn't come out. Instead, he was rather snide. Oh, I don't know, and maybe the bit where he drags people to hell? Or maybe the fact he's on fire? Only some of the time. Daisy shrugged. And again, not a person I made. You had some Pygmalion thing going on there. Fitz tuffed. That's not fair. He paused. Wait, did you say Pygmalion? What's that? Oh, burned. Something the doctor doesn't know. Daisy grinned. But seriously, Greek myth. Nothing in that big brain of yours? He uncrossed his arms, dropping them to his hips again. Fine, I may have skipped some of the classics for extra theoretical physics, wetchy work. He couldn't help how he softened as they fell from whatever the near fight of snapping they'd been in back to familiar ground. So what's a Pygmalion then? Sansa waved the bread and salt forward. Lord Sherwin, you are always most welcome in Winterfell. Actually, Sherwin was a haunted man, only a few years her senior. He twitched, shoulders curled inwards, eyes shifting about at every person nearby. He wore his wounded spirit visibly. But then his was near as fresh as her own horrors. No need for a room, my lady. He bowed his head slightly as he took the bread and salt, eating it hurriedly. Barely chewed it really. Of course, though what hospitality I am able to provide is yours should you change your mind. Sansa gestured for him to enter the gates. He'd refused to do so without bread and salt. At least allow us to provide some warm soup to you and your men. He nodded and followed her through the gates and into the courtyard. His eyes naturally tracked to where the flayed corpses of the Bolton's victims had once hung. I'm sorry, all I could return to you were their bodies. Sansa didn't mention the last she'd seen him. He had been there to witness her marriage to Ramsay. Not that he'd had any choice in the matter. Sherwin cleared his throat. I'd have come sooner. You don't owe me an explanation. She caught his eye. We both know what it meant to suffer under their mercy. He ducked his head again. Sansa accepted it would be a silent walk into her solar before she'd hear why he'd come, unexpectedly. It was good to walk through the yard, to see people going about their tasks. The smell of fresh-cut wood, the burning of the smithy, clean straw. Her home was clean, rebuilding, full of life, and it was heartening to know she'd built this, done this. As they entered the hall, Sherwin paused, the stone blocking the noise from outside. I don't plan to be here long, just a few words with you, and I'll go. Of course. She could tell this would not be going in a way that would be advantageous to her or her plans. However, the late Lord Sherwin, his wife and brother had all been flayed alive for their loyalty to House Stark. For that, she would not turn on him unless she had no other option. The remaining journey to her solar was silent. Once the door closed, leaving them, Brienne and a servant who was tending to the fire, he finally spoke. I received your reward as well as promise of more. I don't want it. He shifted awkwardly, but his tone hadn't been doubtful. Sansa folded her hands before her. Winter is on our doorstep, as well as war. Your house remained loyal when few others did. I know that. He looked up. But we have enough to keep us, and I don't have an army to give you, or men enough to rule any added land you intend to give me. Sherwin looked at the floor. I did nothing. It was my father who was loyal. Sansa felt a flicker of understanding, then guilt. You did what you had to do in order to survive. It doesn't change. It wouldn't be honorable to accept. He settled on after a painful pause. She knew what he was then, a boy who wished to live up to the shadow of a father who'd cast a perfect appearing shadow, especially once venerated by death. And beyond that, someone terrified and ashamed by what that terror had forced him to do. Of course, that meant she knew how to offer what he truly wanted. Honor, pride, revenge. Then earn it. What? He didn't flinch at her change in tone, but it was a near thing. Sansa didn't allow herself to show the slightest flicker of weakness. You believe your father's legacy shouldn't be rewarded for his sacrifice, honor, and loyalty. So prove you're worthy of what he died for. He died for House Stark, so you can live for it. Eh? His eyes were wide as he stared at her, but she'd already won. You say you have no army, but I don't need an army. Most of all, I need loyal men. Sansa refused to release him from her attention. I'm surrounded by houses that bowed. Men who once served my enemies without paying a blood price first. The north is fractured. The south will not leave us long, and my brother John brings tidings of the long night. Come again. Tell me, Lord Surin, where would your father, who died in my family's name, expect you to be? I can't protect you. He was shaken, though. Only needed to be guided by the hand to the place she needed him. So Sansa gave him the purpose he required. Your name? The presence of a loyal lord who I can depend on. She'd never trust him, not when she knew how easily his dreams of honor could be twisted. A house's banner at my back, when I ride to rid our lands of traitors who allowed the north to fall, allowed our families to be killed. A Serwyn standing behind a Stark as there has always been for thousands of years. Sansa wondered if she should feel guilt for what she'd just done. She didn't, though. Her father would, her mother likely too. But it had been necessary, and now Lord Serwyn was praying at the gods would, while his men settled into the rooms she'd ordered prepared. Will you be returning to White Harbor, Lord Manderley? Not unless you wish me to. Waymon laid his hand over hers. I failed you. I failed your family. I won't do it again. I'll remain by your side till your position is secure. Milady, my son can see to White Harbor till then. It'll be good for him. She eyed the large man, his white hair and familiar countenance. She gave a slight nod. Your aid is appreciated, and will not be forgot. Well, I don't need anything, so don't go getting any ideas there. He chuckled fondly. Now about Mo Kalen and the two houses here. What's the plan? Sansa considered him. She didn't trust him, but he was likely her strongest ally at the moment. He'd thrown his lot in with her as well as he could without proposing a marriage alliance. Neither of them had individuals of appropriate ages to form in the first place. Jon is needed for that conversation. She raised a brow. Why haven't you brought up a marriage alliance? It's the easiest and fastest way to secure my position. But you haven't suggested it. No, I haven't. Wyman settled back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. Do you need to know why? He was her closest and greatest support. Yes, I do. At first, because of the bastard. No one deserves whatever he did to you, and throwing a third husband at you just a couple of moons afterwards is cruel. He gave a nod as he spoke, his brow furrowed. And then who would I suggest? You'll have the Flints, Hornwoods, Umbers, Lockes, Manderleys, Glovers, Hornwoods, Reeds, and a half-dozen more, just by right of your name and what you've done so far. I reckon given a few more moons, you'll have a dozen more firmly in your grasp. And that's before they all realize the long night is coming. Which house requires a marriage on top of all that to swear? None of them, that's which one. Waymon looked at her with something that might be pride. A good strong man who can lead beside you is who you need if you're to marry. Not some political hostage exchange for stability. Thought I'd wait to see which noble lad proves himself in the coming moons. But then, I'd say you have a suitor, not even a proper match like that would be worth turning down for. I don't have a suitor. What are you talking about? She frowned slightly. There was nearly no way that he could know of Peter's obsession. He was serious as he replied. I know you've noticed, especially with how much time you spent down south. There are very few reasons a god would act the way that one does. I can believe she'd accept your hospitality for her companion's sake. I can even be persuaded she'd find giving you some aid on a whim. But bowing to you, placing your wants and goals above her own dignity, performing feats of service in your name, that's not something I can believe unless she's come to regard you quite highly. And high regard only goes so far unless she intends to earn something with that regard. That does not mean she means to court me, Sansa replied, possibly too quickly. God, she couldn't. Wyman spoke, his voice gentle. Perhaps court is the wrong word. She hadn't made it a secret. She doesn't intend to remain here. What? Seduce, maybe? But either way. She's got eyes for you. She's made no mention of it, made no advances or indication that's something she wants, which was why Sansa hadn't assumed. Daisy was surprisingly upfront about things. Surely she would be about something of this nature as well. He nodded. Maybe you're right, but if you are, that leaves the question, why does she defer to you like nothing more than a sworn knight? I don't know, but I believe you are mistaken in this matter. Sansa desperately hoped he was. If he wasn't, she couldn't do it. The idea of giving her body to someone again like that made her feel nauseous. She knew she'd have to marry someday, but not now. Not so long as it was avoidable, she intended to avoid it. Wyman deferred, but she could see he didn't agree. As you wish, my lady. Sansa rose, brushing her skirt straight, automatically. I appreciate your counsel. It does not leave this room, however. I wouldn't dream of it, my lady. He hesitated for a second. You have my support regardless of the truth or your response to the matter. She blinked. He'd just offered to stand by her in the case of her rejecting a god. Whether he meant it or not, she was inclined to believe he thought he meant it. Thank you for your time, Lord Manderley. Sansa paused, as she realized she wasn't the only one in the Godswood. She straightened. Your Holiness, I was not expecting you. Hey, Daisy looked over her shoulder at her. I can go if you want privacy to pray. Sansa shook her head, just stepping closer to the heart tree. I haven't prayed in a long time. She looked at the god. Why do you come here? It feels... I don't know. Daisy shrugged, closing her eyes. I can feel it, though, like a song just out of hearing. It's hypnotic, really. Her eyes opened as she breathed out. I guess it's peaceful. Her gaze turned to the face set into the white bark of the tree. It was the one place in King's Landing where people didn't try to talk to me. If that's a hint, there's some future cult members I can go make run some more laps. Daisy's question seemed genuine. She didn't look away from the gaping mouth leaking red sap. Lord Manderley and I discussed my marriage. Are you okay? Daisy was facing her fully now. A hand reached but didn't touch her. Sansa wondered at that. She realized the god hadn't touched her since that day when the Boltons had died. Memories she did not wish to dwell on. I'm surprised it took this long for the topic to be broached. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. Daisy's voice was firm. She turned to meet the focus of the god, and she wondered. Not that. Daisy's face was, she cared. No one deserves that. What can I do to ensure you're not forced into a marriage you don't want? Sansa realized in that moment that she didn't feel threatened. She was unsure at the truth of Warman's words, an idea even she'd considered. There was certainly something going on with the god she didn't quite grasp, but she didn't feel the prickle at the back of her neck she felt around Pede or any of the men who desired her. It was dangerous, but a relief as well. There are no marriage options worth losing it as a future tool. You should be allowed to marry who you want. Daisy frowned. Sansa wondered at the world this god must have come from to think of an arranged marriage as an injustice. Were you never expected to marry? No, she laughed. Not sure if I'm the marrying kind. Daisy's voice was humorous, but it was clearly a mask in its own way. She couldn't understand that. How? Surely one of your position has suitors, alliances for your people. Sure? Daisy rolled her eyes. I have just been ignoring Dick and hoping he goes away with his pining. It'd be super creepy. He's Fitz and Gemma's grandson. She waved a hand. It's complicated, but I'm not interested, so it doesn't really matter. And sure, people take a pass now and then, but it's easy enough to turn them down. Sansa wondered at the implied power to simply be able to ignore suitors, to know marriage was simply a thing to be chosen, if wanted. Surely none would dare turn you down if you wished for a person. You'd be surprised. Daisy brushed some of her hair behind one ear. But what can you do? Sometimes people just don't feel the same way. Sansa breathed out slowly. That is very Dornish of you. Yet the Dornish seem pretty chill from what I've heard. Daisy paused, her eyes flicking towards the north, her posture shifting. Her eyes closed as she dropped to the ground, her hand flattening to it. Daisy could feel the vibrations of the world around her. It had taken hours, weeks to even begin to properly parse out things. But she could feel a vague presence of others. Especially here where the tree and its roots made the rest of the world feel more clear, almost in contrast to the oddness of the magic tree's song. And she could feel it, in the distance. The vibrations of hundreds of men and horses. They were moving closer. Her eyes opened. I think Jon is back. Are you sure? Sansa questioned. She shook her head. No, but we knew he'd be returning soon. If it's not him, I'll handle it. It may be an army, but it wasn't so large of one she'd run the risk of doing horrific damage in handling it. Daisy stood up. Come on, someone will spot them soon and come find you. Daisy grinned at the sight of marching Stark banners approaching down the road towards Winterfell. She'd been right, and based on her recent reading, the other banners she was spotting were Glover, Mormont, and a few of the smaller houses from the north. Actually, that was Ember banners, she was pretty sure. So, looks like Jon did it. He's come back! There was a weight to Sansa's words. A relief and gaping chasm of affection. Daisy was glad the broody guy'd done it, and it helped that Sansa's power base was growing. She spotted the front riding party that was ahead of the march. The black-garbed rider was almost assuredly Jon. Good for you. As they watched it, became unmistakable that it was indeed Jon come back. Daisy stayed in the background as Sansa left to stand in the courtyard to welcome the incoming men. She knew standing too close to the lady would be a problem. No one needed to think Sansa was her puppet or some nonsense. She really hated politics, which was probably why Coulson hadn't used her for interagency meet and greets. She glanced at Joran, who was standing beside her. So, that's basically all the houses we were hoping he'd bring back. I believe so, he pointed to some of the banners. Those there aren't northern must be survivors of Stannis' army. He winced as he moved. Are any of us going to feel our arms again properly? There was some tiny flicker of hope there. Daisy nudged the poor guy slightly. Yeah, it goes away. It's the feeling of your muscles repairing themselves stronger than before. No pain, no gain. Which a bit miserable, but unfortunately the truth. Right, he squared his shoulders. It's an honor to be trained by you, your holiness. She was proud of her men, even if their presence freaked her out a bit. We'll have to make sure you all can read. Truly? His eyes widened as he looked at her in surprise. Daisy hummed. It'll help you all, and I can't just make you run laps and do pull-ups all day. I'll let the men know. Joran's chest puffed with pride. His unofficial position as leader of the men was clearly a point of great pride to him. She smiled slightly as she returned her attention to where the front riders had just entered the courtyard. As the men dismounted, she noticed Sansa had taken a half step forward almost as if she couldn't help it, which was odd, especially from someone as tightly controlled as the redhead. Daisy was about to ask Joran if he knew, only to still as a kid stepped past Jon. Tall, nearly as tall as Jon really, but clearly a kid from this distance. But fairly unremarkable, his clothing less fine than the others that just entered. Only Sansa clearly recognized something in the kid Daisy didn't, because she ran, catching the kid in her arms. There were murmurs as the kid and Sansa clung to each other. Daisy dropped from the ramparts to the courtyard and glared to ensure no one was stupid enough to interrupt them. She might not know exactly what was happening, but she knew family reunited. The desperate touch. The open emotion apparent on the Lady of Winterfell for the second time since Daisy had met her. Jon stepped over, wrapping his arms around both of them, the three just clinging to each other, tears on more than one cheek. She didn't need to ask to know the kid was a Stark, and it ached to witness. Her eyes tracked to where Fitz was standing by the entrance to his workshop. When had her family ceased to be this, and become what it was now? It was painful to see, but she was happy for them, so unbearably happy for her friend. Sansa brushed Rickon's curls away from his cheek as he slept. She couldn't bear to look away from his face, afraid he'd disappear if she did. Her throat was thick with tears. She stayed sitting on the side of the bed. He's half wild. Jon sat in the chair by the fire, the warmth and security of his presence. A balm to the room. She smiled, memories of her tiny brother biting anyone who held him too long. He always was, like Arya was, which he was as old as Arya had been when they'd left for King's Landing. They'd all been so young. Hey! He always was a biter, wasn't he? Jon chuckled. He won't be parted from the woman who's raised him. Her name's Asha. Sansa didn't consider that an issue. She'll be given a position in the household. I'd give her anything she wanted for keeping him alive. He can't read or write. Jon looked uncomfortable. We'll have to protect him, or the lords will eat him alive. They won't like he's wildling raised. Sansa's brow furrowed as she looked back to her baby brother. He needs a regent. We'll need one for years to come. She bit the inside of her lip as she thought through the issues they'd face with a boy. Lord, it wouldn't be easy. But between her and Jon, they could do it. We can protect him. If the three of us don't allow them to turn us against each other, we can do it. So what? You're regent, and I lead our armies for you. He just looked tired. Once we've retaken Moat Cailin, we can turn our attention to the dead. Sansa knew he wasn't going to like what came next. No, we can't. What are you talking about? That's the last hold of Frey or Bolton men in the north. Jon was wary then, a look she didn't like to see on his face. She kept her voice soft to avoid waking Rickon. Not that she thought he would wake for anything short of yelling. The deep, even breaths raising and lowering his chest reassured her he was deeply asleep. We need the united North to stand a chance. Am I wrong? The North will be united with the last of the Bolton forces gone. They'll follow House Stark. They're good and loyal men. Jon's voice was pained and so incredibly sure he spoke the truth. Sansa refused to allow her brother's idiotic idealism get them killed. We cannot afford to have our own men turn on us. If we ignore treachery and forgive wrongs done to us, we'll look weak. The North won't follow a weak leader. So what? You want to attack the Karstarks, Ryswells, and Dustins, add to the death. We can't fight 3 of our own houses, and the dead in the south. No, we can't, she straightened her skirts. I'm not a soldier, but if our home is not in order, we'll face enemies without as well as within. Jon hands fisted over his knees. We'll earn their loyalty with mercy. Our ancestors didn't win the North with mercy. The Iron Throne wasn't forged with mercy. Father didn't win the rebellion with mercy. Did your mercy earn your brother's loyalty, Jon? Because they stabbed you. He breathed out slowly. What are you planning? We offer terms to House Dustin and House Ryswell that will strengthen our position and ensure in the coming war they have no choice but to fight the dead. Sansa knew the next part would be what Jon would oppose the most. But it was the most needed, and House Karstark cannot be allowed to continue. They're the greatest threat to our position. They abandoned Robb. Those who stayed fought side by side with the Boltons. Jon stared at her, his face solemn. You mean to make an entire house extinct? I've already spoken to the Umbers. They've agreed to send their forces to join a group of men led by you to take the Carehold. Lord Mandaree and the Flints have agreed to ensure our army remains large enough to handle the Dustins and Ryswells. Sansa's voice remained matter-of-fact. She needed Jon to lead their army after all. It wasn't something she could lie or hide from him. He shook his head. Does my opinion even matter? Yes, but I'll do it myself if I have to. Jon's fist slammed into the stone wall as he breathed heavily as the door to the cellar closed behind him. It'd been the only place he'd be able to avoid others. And what was he supposed to do? He couldn't leave his last living sister and brother. But what Sansa was planning it would just bring more pointless death. He nearly jumped out of his skin at the sound of a throat clearing. So, hi? A very bemused-sounding Daisy greeted. He stared at where the god was perched in one corner with a lantern and a book. What are you doing in here? I mean, you're here too, she pointed out, eyes twinkling in the low light. But I don't know if you've noticed, but everyone thinks I'm a god. It's nice to get away, you. He splayed his hand across his face, closing his eyes, and just groaned. Do you know what my sister plans? Probably. Daisy set her book aside. Jon walked over and dropped onto some grain sacks near her, destroying House Karstark and marching on House Ryswell and Dustin. Yeah, I knew about that. It was pretty obvious she intended to from, before you left. This is news to you. She looked genuinely confused. He scoffed. I really do know nothing. You clearly know how to keep your hair super clean and pretty. Just saying. She held up her hands in mock surrender at his glare. Jon couldn't help it then. He huffed. Yes, well, thanks. You're welcome, Daisy shifted so her legs were folded under her. Want to, talk about it? He stared at her, and what did it matter to a god? And wasn't prayer talking to gods? If there was an appropriate person to ask advice from, it was this god. None of this matters except for the dead. It's the only battle that matters. All the router, we don't have time or the resources to lose.
Yeah, I've been there.
She leaned back against the wall. You want to do the right thing, the good thing? Jon was relieved. She understood what he meant. It's the only way forward. Once they know the threat is the dead, it won't matter if they like us or not. They'll fight. People aren't organizations, Daisy hummed, her fingers playing at the hem of one of her sleeves. People can be good and do the right thing. The smart thing. Organizations like your houses. Her voice pitched up, and she wiggled a hand. He didn't understand almost any of what she'd just said. Which she spoke so oddly, her meaning was mostly understandable. He frowned. You believe Sansa's right. The lords won't come when called, even for the long night. You people prize your stubborn pride, and your sister is showing mercy. Daisy unfolded herself, feet hitting the ground. She held out her hand to him. Come on. He hesitated but reached out and took her hand. Jon barely kept from reacting at how easily she hauled him to his feet. Strong grip. Yeah, I'm still getting used to that. Daisy shrugged. Come on. Jon quietly followed behind her as she led him through the halls. He recognized they were moving towards the Mater's chambers. He frowned, wondering at what she wanted to show him. But he held his tongue. As they reached the several rooms set aside for the seriously ill, he realized there was a guard standing before one of the doors. The guard straightened at the sight of them. Your Holiness, Lord Stark! Jon opened his mouth to correct the man. He was a Snow, not a Stark. He wheezed as the god's elbow slammed into his gut. She smiled pleasantly. Hog, why don't you go find some more bruise cream for the men? I'll remain till you get back. "Of course, Holiness," he bowed before scurrying off. Jon raised a brow. That was concerning the men answered to this god so automatically. He'd have to look into that. For now, though, he curiously followed the god into the room. It was a small room, though cozy, a fire in the hearth, and a large rug on the floor. It was furnished simply, but nothing was in ill repair. In the middle of the room was a cradle. Daisy easily walked to the cradle and lifted the swaddled babe. She poked its nose with a gentle flick before turning towards him as she cradled the babe. She looked at him as she held the rosy-cheeked child. This is Torrhen Bolton. Jon's breath froze in his throat. He knew exactly who this child was then, and he couldn't hate the babe. He doubted he was capable of that. It was a healthy-looking babe, though, its clear blue eyes blinking at him. Waldo was escorted to White Harbor, and from there will be taken to the Silent Sisters. Of course, she was given 2 weeks to recover some before she was removed. Daisy shifted the babe so that it was against her chest and began to bounce slightly as she rubbed its back. I believe your sister intends for the Mormonts to take this little guy once he's big enough to travel. Jon stepped closer. He carefully held out a hand, touching a single finger to the babe's cheek. He understood why he'd been shown this mercy then. Thank you. Anytime, Daisy hummed as she carefully made an odd rocking movement to lull the babe back to sleep. And as someone who nearly got 2 of my best friends killed because I couldn't kill a traitor, once a traitor willing to kill friends, pretty much dependably traitor for life, the dead are coming. How can that not be enough for us to put aside our grievances with each other? None of it matters, just the living and the dead. Jon's hands tightened as he stared at the ground. Daisy gave his statement real thought before answering. People aren't logical, not really. When your sister thought I was going to kill her, she stabbed Ramsay 37 times. You've died and still are going to fight anyways. Logic it's not why we do things. Not really. I wanted to save the world, but I ended up just trying to save the people I loved. If you're right, then there is no hope. Jon stared into the fire, the light flickering as it warmed the room in a way he never felt in his bones any longer. She huffed. I'm saying you should listen to your sister. She's trying to help you save the world, just with a lot less faith in the goodness of mankind. Daisy caught his eye as he looked up. She's named you Jon Stark, you know? What? But Jon trailed off as he swallowed down the jolt of emotion. His sister didn't have the authority to legitimize him. But if she'd been naming him a Stark before Rickon's return, it meant she'd risked her right to Winterfell for him. Because she cared. Jon hesitated to lead. If I may, I believe I need to speak with my sister. Go, I've got baby B. Her lips twitched. Babies are easy. Besides, I'm good with them. His face was soft as he looked at them. Thank you. Anytime. She raised a hand, wiggling her fingers. Now shoo. Jon paused in front of Sansa's room. He sighed and then raised his hand and knocked softly on the door. He opened the door and let himself in. He knew Sansa would still be awake. His mouth tightened slightly as he saw her bent over missives at their father's desk. Rickon still sleeping in her bed. She also very pointedly wasn't looking up. He closed the door behind him. Walking towards her desk, he took the seat in front of it. All right, explain it to me. I'll listen properly, this time. Why should I believe you? Sansa looked up from her writing at him. Jon sighed. Because I can be an idiot. But you're my sister, and I know you wouldn't want to play politics if it wasn't important. Sansa set her quill down. We can't rule like Father or Robb did. The world's changed and they couldn't survive it. Our grandfather, uncle, and aunt couldn't survive it. You mean to take us back to how the Starks of old ruled? Jon leaned back in his seat. They were of one of the oldest bloodlines in all of Westeros. He wasn't a fool. He'd heard the lessons of Brandon the Builder, the Night's King, Brandon the Breaker, King Theon Stark, the men who'd crushed the other kings of the North through entire houses, wiped off the map. There was a reason they'd been the kings of winter, and it hadn't been their honor or their mercy. Sansa, he felt heavy as he accepted she was likely right. She raised a brow. It was how our house brought our people through the first long night. Saze, the men all call me Stark. It hadn't really struck him till Daisy had informed him, but it was true. It wasn't just a few small folk mistaking things they knew little about. You are a Stark, the oldest living son of Eddard Stark. Her chin tipped up ever so slightly, as if daring him to argue with her. He couldn't. It meant everything. You don't have the power to legitimize me. Who will stop me? Sansa's brow rose ever so slightly. I say you're a Stark, and we have a god around somewhere who will sign a document legitimizing you if we ask. She paused slightly. We should ensure we do that. Not even the king can contradict a god. Perhaps if he hadn't died, hollowing him out. Or perhaps if he hadn't already spent his tears at the sight of Rickon and his sister safe in his arms in Winterfell, he'd have cried. It'd been his dream since he was a boy to bear the name of Stark. But it wasn't that made his heart feel like it's swollen in his chest. It was that it meant Sansa trusted him enough for this. Perhaps not as they should trust each other, but in her own way. All right, what do we need to do? Rickon's eyes flicked up the walkway above the yard to where his sister stood. Where once he thought his father and mother had stood, his eyes returned to where Jon was standing. He bounced on his toes, raising his sword. His blood was up at the chance to fight his brother. His lips pulled back, baring his teeth. And then he lunged forward. Jon blocked and then knocked him back. You don't have the strength to overpower me yet. Rickon grinned and bounced forward, swinging his sword upwards. As Jon's sword struck his, he grabbed Jon's sword hand. He lunged over the sword's teeth bared for his brother. Jon's hand grabbed him by the front of his clothes and tossed him back. Defend. Don't just attack. He approached, then swung his sword in easy strikes. Stumbling, arms shaking from the force of it, Rickon skidded around the ground, ducking and jumping. He tried to circle his brother for a chance to attack at his back. Sweating, he slid under Jon's strike, then leaping for him, teeth bared, in an attempt to stab him with a dulled dagger. He'd had to drop his sword for the chance. Jon grabbed his dagger holding hand, bringing his sword to Rickon's throat. Yield. I yield, Rickon slumped. Jon chuckled, letting him go, and ruffled Rickon's hair. Better. Rickon's chest puffed up as he basked under his brother's approval. He grinned at his older brother. He'd proved he was useful. Can we go again? In a bit. Watch the others first. You'll learn watching them. Jon gently pushed him to a sawhorse where some of the men were watching. He turned to Morse Omber. What about you, my lord? Morse grabbed an axe, striding towards Jon. I'll try fighting you. Rickon hopped up on the sawhorse. He frowned, nose twitching as something he couldn't parse out drifted past his nose. His eyes went up to where Sansa was still watching from the walkway above them. He smiled and let himself fade into Shaggy Dog. It was safe to investigate the strange smell. His paws patted across the ground as he loped through the field outside the walls of Winterfell. It was both his home and not his home. Claws digging into the earth, he pressed his nose near the earth as he made his way through the gates, ignoring the guards. As his nose snuffled at the inside of the yard, he could smell it better. It was some creature he'd never smelt before. It was similar enough to human that when he was just Rickon, he might not have noticed it properly. But as Rickon, who was also Shaggy Dog, as this him, he could smell the differences. There was something fundamentally different about the scent from human scent. The familiar scent of Osha distracted him. He trotted towards his female pack member, bumping his head against her hand. What are you doing in there, little wolf? Osha looked at him knowingly as she scratched behind one ear. His tongue lolled as he enjoyed the quick scratch. He then broke away, back after the strange smell. It had a burn to it, like the scent from just before lightning struck, mixed with coal. So faint, though, nearly human. Maybe someone had rolled in coal a few days ago. Best check, though. If it was a threat, he wouldn't have it in their home. His body was safe. This strange smell needed locating. As he padded around men, sniffing the air, he realized he was closing in on where his body was. Coming to the edge of the fighting ring, he saw Jon and Mors battling in the yard. Jon winning with amazing skill at the sword. It was incredible to see, but a flash of something he didn't recognize caught his eye, besides his body. With a gasp, his body that was just Rickon's head snapped to the side, where a person was leaning against the sawhorse he was seated on. His eyes widened as he looked at her. You're not human. She laughed, eyes bright and amused. No, I'm not. The not human held out her hand. My name's Daisy. Rickon, he hesitantly took her hand, squeezed a furrow in his brow. Was this how Southerners greeted each other? What are you? Daisy's laughter continued as she warmly squeezed his hand. Then, instead of releasing his hand, she held his, and suddenly, from his hand, traveling all the way to the tips of his toes, to the top of his head, was Buzzingwig. Something. What? His mouth opened in confusion. She released his hand, the buzzing vanishing as it come. You should be watching your brother, not me. His cheeks burned as his head snapped back to the fight. Rickon couldn't help it, his human mouth smiling at the sight of Jon knocking Mors on his arse. He remembered watching a younger Jon fighting Robb in the yard. In his home, by his siblings, it felt like pack. Your brother is an amazing swordsman, Daisy remarked casually. Rickon frowned as he was reminded of the not-human. He looked at her, lips pulling back, low growl in the back of his throat. I won't let you hurt my family. Then it's a good thing I consider your sister a friend, and probably your brother as well, given more time around his pouting. Daisy nudged his attention back to where Mors and Jon were going again. They're good people. Rickon focused on the fight. His brother was a wolf, watching, waiting, and then striking. You better be telling the truth. You can ask your brother when he's done kicking their butts. Look at how he's controlling the fight, she narrated. He draws him in, and then attacks. Rickon watched as Jon did just that, deflecting an axe blow, only to step forward, punching Mors in the face. How do I beat him then? You don't, Daisy chuckled. Not yet. You don't commit to an attack unless you know it'll hit. He nodded. He could do that. What else? You're smaller than him. You won't beat him with a sword. He's got you on reach. She flipped the knife over in her fingers before passing it hilt forward over. Try to get close. Swords are harder to use up close. Rickon looked at her, and then nodded. Thanks. Hopping off the sawhorse, he waited for Mors to hit the ground again. He darted forward. Can I try again now? Mors laughed loudly, the sound booming outwards. The boy's got the wolf's blood. Aye, he does. Jon chuckled, looking at him with so much affection it filled Rickon full to bursting. All right, let's see if you learned anything from Mors here. But then we're going in to eat, or our sister will have my head for starving you. Rickon laughed brightly as he hung onto his brother's back. I'll beat you. I'm sure you will, Jon huffed fondly. You need some practice first. He buried his nose into the fur ruff of Jon's cloak, burying his smile in the tickling of it against his skin. He was home. Daisy knocked on the master's door before letting herself in. He probably wasn't even in his room at the moment. Well, storeroom, not bedroom. She wasn't spying on the man, though she should probably take a quick glance at his things if she had the chance. She hummed as she looked at the various dried herbs and glass jars of odds and ends used for what was theoretically medicine to these people. She groaned. Damn. Nothing was labeled. Daisy closed her eyes. Her senses had registered something. Ah, heartbeat from the attached room. A few seconds later, she heard the soft shuffle of footsteps and breathing announcing the approaching person. Sorry for rooting around your stuff. Do you require assistance, Your Holiness? Wilcon asked, hiding his surprise shockingly well. Daisy turned to face him. I was looking for some plants. Thought you might have a few. You wouldn't mind me nabbing? Of course. What are you seeking? Wilcon approached respectfully, his heart beating far too fast, no matter how hard he was trying to hide it. She smiled, hoping to put him at ease. Do you have dandelion roots? He frowned slightly. Small yellow flowers. They turn all fuzzy and the seeds blow off. Super hard to get rid of. You do have those, right? Yes, we have them, he chuckled, stepping to one of the corner shelves and opening a drawer. Pulling out a package, he set it on a small side table. Unwrapping it, he revealed the roots. Is this enough? Daisy sighed, stepping closer, only to pause. Is this important? I'm fine if you don't have any to spare. No, I don't use it much. Wilcon rewrapped the roots and then held them out. She accepted them and held his gaze. You're sure? I'm sure. He moved to closing the drawer he'd taken the roots from. If I might be permitted, what do you require it for? Tea. Daisy carefully stuffed the package into an inner pocket in her jacket. It's not proper tea, but I've been living with a Fitzsimmons for too many years. Not to have picked up a like of it, and well, Fitz is Scottish. They drink tea like you people drink wine. Wilkins stepped to a different cupboard. Tea? We have tea, though I've never heard of dandelion root used for it. Wait, you do? Not a super rare, expensive thing, right? Daisy had no interest in bankrupting people because she wanted some tea. She'd kill for coffee. Do you have coffee? Walken shook his head. It's similar to the cost of a bottle of wine. We purchase it from Essos along with most of our spices. Unfortunately, I don't know what coffee is. It's made from dark beans. You roast them, grind them, then boil them. It tastes rich and bitter and soup's delicious, she explained hopefully. I'd do terrible things for a cup of coffee. I'm afraid I don't know of what you speak. I could make inquiries if you wish, Wolken offered as he lifted a ceramic jar and held it out. She accepted the jar, lifting the lid and beamed at the sight of tea leaves. She breathed in, closing her eyes at the smell. Fuck, Jamin and Fitz's love of the stuff was contagious, apparently. But caffeine had always been a weakness. Oh, thank God. You're most welcome. Walken sounded amused. Her eyes opened as she looked at the master. How can I repay you for this? No repayment necessary. It's an honor to serve. He had a barely there frown on his face. Daisy looked at the man carefully. Is something bothering you? It's just, or the seven real? And a crisis of faith? Shrugging, she closed the lid on the jar of tea. I don't know. I'm not even sure I am a god. Her mouth twitched at the disbelief on his face. I'm not human, and my kind have been worshipped. Some even called gods, but I can't hear prayer. Bless or curse people. I only have the one gift, or well, two now, I guess. But I don't know if your seven are real or not. I know there's something to the old gods. I can feel those trees are alive in a way that I can't really describe. So maybe I've seen a lot of weird shit. I wouldn't be surprised if they were. If I may, what makes your people different from any other god? He seemed genuinely curious. The lack of trembling awe was nice, quite frankly. So Daisy rocked back on her heels. On my world, the gods were at war, and the human world was just kind of their stomping grounds for killing each other. So this one court, the Kree decided they needed more soldiers than they had. I don't know exactly how, but it wasn't good. They ended up with human Kree children they did things to. The Inhumans. Human weaknesses. Lifespan usually. But each Inhuman had one gift. Mine is vibrations. She reached up and touched his hand, letting the faintest of vibrations run through his arm. Wolken made a shocked sound. She smiled softly at his expression. But the gifts are dangerous. A lot of them can harm or kill the Inhuman with them. I think in the first couple of years after mine woke, I broke every bone in my body, especially my arms several times over, and the bruising and internal bleeding weren't great. Lincoln felt like he was burning alive, but human weaknesses also make us easier to control. At least the Kree thought so. Didn't work out for them. They ran off and hoped we'd just kinda go away. But that left a small group of Inhumans mixed with humans. You're different from the rest, though, aren't you? Wolken asked carefully. She grimaced. There's a cost to fighting for too long. You die, or change, between training and then. We had an enemy. He'd have killed every human on our world. I wasn't strong enough to stop him. A call was made to dose me with a elixir of immortality, I guess. It makes everything about a person stronger. Your Holiness, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're a protector, and what you've told your followers is what you think will protect this world once you leave. Her cheeks heated at that. Yeah, a little bit. I'm not really. I haven't done this before. If I may be honest, you seem to be a well-intentioned being. Honesty may serve you well. Wolken dipped his head in a gesture of what was likely respect. Daisy breathed out, fuck. She'd been dreading that was going to be what she was going to have to do. Coulson would be so much better at this. Even had the coming back after a few days thing going for him. That's not going to go well. Why should it not? Wolken asked. She pushed some of her hair behind one ear. I've never done this before. If I make a mistake, it's going to cause problems for all of you. Just, religion is complicated, and not my thing. Perhaps that is a place to start. Have you considered what people want from you is not a new faith, but rather a new way of expressing the faith they already have? Wolken folded his hands before him inside his long sleeves. Daisy looked at the man. How would you do it? Well, Daisy stared at the men who'd chosen to follow her. She'd run them out into the woods outside of the keep. It was, well, she had to speak their language if she was going to lead them. Something she absolutely was not qualified to do. Coulson had been wrong. She wasn't a leader, but she was going to have to be. I know you have questions, especially considering I went and used my name. There was nodding as the men looked at her, eager for answers. She barely kept her wince internal. Look, just sit down, okay? Daisy dropped down onto the ground facing the 24 men who'd chosen to follow her over everything. It'd been 16 a week ago. Right. I'm not a god that gets worshipped a lot. I just am not. So everything about respect and loving other people it's an ideal to work towards. But following me won't get you anything. I can't give you anything. There won't be a reward or a claim. It's about protecting and helping people no matter what. And that's not a sacrifice most people can give, or should be judged for not making. If any of you want to go and repledge your oaths to Lady Stark, you can. If you want a god who can hear your prayers There's your old gods. Joran frowned. Sacrifice? Look, the path I chose, the one we chose, is hard. It's about standing up knowing you might lose, to be willing to lose limbs, your life, sanity, everything. I was part of a 6-person team when I joined. Our leader lost his arm and continued until he died. Of the 2 knights, one is dead and the other has a limp, lost her husband, then her lover, and is still fighting. Fitz his wife, our healer, well, she's changed, and it's breaking her. Hell, I'm only alive because I ended up not being human. It's not easy, or fair, and I started training you for it automatically because it's what I know. Hogg looked at Joran and then back at her. It's self-sacrifice. For better everything. Kinda, yeah, Daisy ran a hand through her hair. The world won't be better unless people do their part to make it so. But it's not easy. Wilbur frowned. I don't rightly understand, but I've just done what folks expected of me, and it left me helping that mad shit, Ramsay. I heard the screaming and I didn't do anything. His eyes were burning as he looked up at her. I think I can sacrifice a lot to not have to just stand there again. There were murmurs of agreement. Joran gave a sharp nod. I agree, and I want to do something that matters. Daisy's heart ached for these guys. They were barely adults, if at all. They didn't deserve to feel worthless and have eyes that seen too much. All right, I'll teach you what I can. But I don't want any of you to think you have to do this. Jon stared at the large map of the north. His face was solemn as he took in the position Sansa had secured for them. The problem is the Karstarks are northeast, while the Raswells, Dustins, and Moat Callan are southwest. We'll have to split the army. I'd gotten that, Sansa replied dryly. We have won and Daisy. If they try to force us to lay siege to them, it won't work well for them. Jon nodded. Considering the giant and god, none of the battles would be long. Their army was large enough that meeting them in the field would be foolish. A siege would be the obvious option. Their enemies would take. The Stark army wasn't large enough for a siege. They'll see the wildlings, see our banners, and they'll hole up in their castles. But it'll take longer than we have to march our men to all of our enemies' doors. If you took a few hundred men and won with you and rode hard to meet with the Umber host, could you take Carhold? Sansa looked at him. If you marched east, I could take the majority of our forces and Daisy and go south and west. It would give us time to have secured the north before the Lord's Moat. His fist clenched. I can't protect you if I'm on the other side of the north. I don't like it. But would it work? Sansa insisted, despite the fact that it'd leave her leading an army to battle without him by her side. It could work. Jon's jaw tightened as he looked at the map. Her Holiness can fly, can't she? Sansa paused and looked at him, clearly not expecting that question. Yes, I've seen her do so once, and she traveled from nearly the Dreadfort to Winterfell and back in one evening. What are you thinking? Do you think she'd consent to flying me from our western army with you to our eastern army once it reaches the Carhold? I could lead both armies and protect you. Jon hated the idea of being separated from his siblings again. His sister made a sound in the back of her throat. We can certainly ask. Her lips twitched. She'd have to carry you, I believe. Jon could live with the indignity. It would be our best option. We don't have anyone I'd trust to lead an army for you. And Lord Umber may be a gifted warrior, but his temper makes him utterly unsuited for command, which leaves Lords Manderly and Serwyn, neither of whom are ideal. There's Lord Glover, but his loyalty is untested as of yet. Sansa sighed. Your Sir Davos, is he of any use as a general? He shook his head. That's not his skill. He's a good advisor. I'd recommend you listen when he speaks. Has got a good head on his shoulders and knows the true enemy is the one to the north. Your thoughts on Lord Glover? Sansa took a seat, but her eyes were sharp as she listened to him. Jon pressed his hands flat against the table. He's tired and has lost much. But he's loyal, I think. His lips twitched. Lady Mormont is the one you'll want to look out for, that came with me. She's sharp as a needle, sharp-tongued, that one. She won't be kind. Wonderful. Sansa just sounded exhausted herself. We need a single solid strategy before we speak to the lords. This could work, either with you in both places, or with you in one and I in another. He grimaced, but didn't disagree. It was the only way to secure the north fast enough for them to have a chance at time to prepare for the dead. Reckon won't like being forced to stay. No, I wish we didn't have to ask it of him. Sansa drummed her fingers on the wooden arm of her chair. I'd leave Manderley and Greyjohn Umber here at Winterfell to hold it in Rickon's name till one or both of us can return. Jon straightened and walked to the other chair and dropped heavily into it. We have to find a way to get Dragonglass, maybe Wildfire. I've prepared a contract for the Iron Bank. 6 of them that we can accept, which leaves us room for negotiation. An emissary party will have to be sent soon. Sansa gestured to her desk. That was, well, the weight of the paper likely wouldn't break it, considering it was good, solid ironwood, as well as a series of tax adjustments, increase in trade to Essos, expansion of our trade fleet, an expansive series of measures for preparing for winter, the plans for the construction of an additional glasshouse, the rebuilding of Winterfell, and as close to a sustainable rate of goods to be moved to the wall. He stared at his sister. Will the lords accept it? Yes, Lord Manderley is already bound by contract and self-interest in supporting it. As are the Flints of Widow's Peak. Lord Umber is pledged to it, as is Lord Serwyn. That's 4 houses with enough power to force the rest to follow, especially if Lord Glover and Lady Mormont follow suit. Sansa's face tightened. We'll need Lord Baelish. Jon straightened in his chair. No, everything you've said of him is wrong. He's a snake. The one I can handle, Sansa swallowed, her face tightening. I may have a solution to keep him leashed, at least in part. He frowned as he looked at her. What? Something I won't speak of till I'm sure it can be done. Sansa was cautious, but we need the Vale. Their men, their protection at our backs. Jon grit his teeth. He'd kill the man if he so much as touched his sister. Have you already written? No, but his whores will have passed the news to him already. Sansa held his eye. We can't fight the dead alone. You said that. Using my own words against me, he huffed, but reached out, taking his sister's hand. How complete of a battle strategy do we need for today? Sansa stood, walking to the large wooden trunk and opening it. She pulled out a garment of some sort. You can make plans I ensure don't leave us vulnerable in a minute. First, I made you this. He stood carefully accepting the neatly folded garment. As he looked at it, he recognized it as a cloak, one as fine as Father had ever had. In fact, it looked just like the one Father had had. The leather had an embossed imprint of the dire wolf of House Stark. You made this as close to how Father's looked as I could remember. She smiled, ever so slightly at him, as he stared at it in awe. Jon's throat felt thick with emotion. You always were clever with a needle. Rhaenyra was rather clever with her own. Sansa looked fond and sad at the same time. He wrapped an arm around her, squeezing his sister in comfort. She was alive last Bran saw. When she hears we have the North again, she'll come home, because he had to believe that their youngest sister was alive. Rickon was alive and he hadn't dared hope for that, but now he couldn't help but dare hope. Sansa shifted, burying her nose in his shoulder. They could plan a war in a minute, and then go find Rickon and just remind themselves that they still had each other, that not everything was lost. Not yet. Sansa held Rickon's hand to keep him from walking into the Lord's Hall. I need you to promise me you won't try to defend me. She kept going before he could interject with outrage at the thought. I can defend myself. You're going to be here to learn. As long as none of them try to attack you, Rickon has a slightly mullish look to him. She knew that was a disaster waiting to happen, but one that was likely going to happen no matter what she did to prevent it. But for now, this would likely be enough. Listen, these will be your bannermen one day. She pulled him slightly closer and pressed a kiss to his forehead. Rickon got a slightly pinched look on his face at the mention of him being in charge of anything. I can go with the hunters afterwards. So long as you stick by Jon, Sansa smiled at him. He was as wild as he'd been as a babe, but he'd need to learn to control it, though he had a few years. Years she'd ensure he was given. She squeezed his forearm and then turned, her mask falling into place as one of the men opened the doors for her. She strode, Rickon on her heels, Brienne faithfully guarding their backs, into the Lord's Hall. When the Starks had been kings, it was the room they'd ruled their lords and land from. A great stone room, roaring fireplace, and long tables and benches laid out. She kept her chin raised as she entered. The lords currently in Winterfell were all in the room, as well as several others. Tormund, Davos, several surviving knights from Stannis' army. It wasn't a full court, but it was the beginning of one. What had clearly been some argument silenced at her entrance. She moved to the head table, naturally going to the great wooden chair of the Lord, Jon stiffly coming to stand beside her. Rickon quietly took the seat beside her as he'd been instructed to earlier. Sansa stood looking at her court. Let us begin, shall we? She sat gracefully, her dress folding as it had been designed to. There was grumbling, but the lords did as expected. Sansa spoke. Lawrence Snow. The young man stood, Lord Glover slapping his shoulder as he walked before her. Lawrence bowed. Lady Stark, you're the last male issue of the late Lord Hornwood. As such, it falls upon you to take his seat and his name. The Hornwood is yours. Sansa flicked her hand towards Lord Manderley. House Manderley, House Flint of Widow's Watch, and House Serwyn have pledged their support in your ascension to Lord of Hornwood, of the Hornwood. Lawrence shook slightly with what looked like joy. He drew his sword, dropping to one knee. He held the hilt of his sword, the tip against the stone floor. House Hornwood is yours, my lady, from this day till my last day and for all the days of my line, to serve as your bannerman, to come to your aid whenever called upon, now and always. Rise, Sansa held the young man's eyes. We are approaching dark days. Your willingness to stand beside House Stark against the dead does you credit and will not be forgotten. There was some banging. Lawrence was clapped on the back by the Umbers as he was dragged back to his seat. Sir Dondarrion hobbled forward. His leg was wrapped tightly as he leaned heavily on his crutch. He was the oldest of the surviving men of Stannis' army. He spoke, his voice deep but tight with pain. Lady Stark, we followed King Stannis to the death, but we survived. We can't return to our homes, knowing what's beyond the wall. His eyes flicked to Jon. Stannis respected him, and I'd follow his command. So if you'll have us, we'll fight. Then you shall have a place by my hearth, meat and mead, at my table. I pledge to ask no service of you that would bring you dishonor, so long as you remain in my service and service to House Stark. Sansa swore. It would be a boon to have knights in her service, even if it wasn't for life. It gave her legitimacy. Dondarrion gave as close to a bow as he could give with his injuries. Then we pledge our swords to your cause, we'll shield your back and give our lives if need be, by the old gods and the new. Enough of this. Lyanna Mormont stood, her dark eyes sharp as she stepped forward. Dondarrion limped to the side, giving the floor to the Lady of Bear Island. Sansa looked at the girl. She kept her brother's thoughts on her in mind. Lady Mormont, I came because Ned Stark's son said the dead were coming with the long night. But all I hear is you're planning on marching south. I didn't come for that. Lyanna didn't waver as she stood before her, proud and unshakable. She breathed in. Without a united North, we stand no chance against the dead. And you care about the North, or are you a Lannister or is a Bolton? I've heard conflicting reports. Her tone was sharp. Sansa reached out, grasping Rickon's forearm that had gone tense. A low, nearly inaudible growl in the back of his throat. I am a Stark. I was born a Stark. I will always be a Stark. I will die a Stark. She stared at the girl. Would you have all of our armies march to the wall? What would they eat? Their weapons would be all but useless against the dead. And what happens if traitor houses attack their homes while they're at the wall? Do you believe they will stay on the wall while their homes are burned? We have a chance to prepare for the dead, or do you disagree, Lady Mormont? Prepare how? Lyanna half asked, half demanded. Sansa looked to Jon. I believe my brother can explain our battle strategy better than I. Right, Jon spoke, the weight of command on his shoulders. Sansa had a hardly noticeable smile as she listened to her brother lay out the strategy they'd worked out beforehand. It was a sound, and she could tell the lords in the room approved. Sansa stared at the brooch Podrick had brought to her earlier. She spun it between her fingers, thinking. It was a very specific symbol, a dire wolf's head on a weirwood leaf. She couldn't seem to take her eyes away from it. What's wrong? Jon asked. His face frowned as he put his sword down. She ran a finger along the edge of the brooch. Rickon's lessons? Good, he's got spirit in him. Jon chuckled. Fights like the free folk. Wokan is teaching him his letters. Sansa gave a slight nod. The lords won't accept him if we don't make them. They hate the free folk too much. He's a boy, Jon protested, but sighed as he unhooked the cloak she'd made him, laying it over the back of a chair. We can protect him till he's old enough. Sansa let the matter fade. There was nothing to be done other than what they were already doing. Pod brought me one of the brooches Daisy had made for her followers. She tossed it to him. He easily caught it, his frown deepening as he looked at it. Sansa, what is this? It's an entire religious order, dedicated to House Stark by a god who regularly bows and dedicated her ruin of House Bolton to my name. Sansa looked up at him, catching his dark eyes as they widened in understanding. Jon spoke slowly. Is she courting you? Mayhaps. According to Cran, The boy I have assisting Fitz, she has taken a female lover before. Sansa felt her brow crinkling. Lord Manderley thinks so, but her motives confuse me. Her brother moved the chair so he could sit directly in front of her. We're not selling you to her in exchange for a few victories. Lord Baxley plays a game when he tries to understand a person's motives. He assumes the worst. What's the worst reason they could possibly have for saying what they say and doing what they do? Sansa looked at her brother. The scale changes when that person is a god. Jon nodded, setting the brooch aside. The worst she could want is to destroy our world, but that doesn't fit her actions at all. Sansa replied, looking at the fire, unless she means to play with us or gain something before doing so. Jon shook his head. Why play with the children then? Or read books she clearly finds boring. So, at least our god most likely does not intend to destroy our world. Conquering it doesn't fit either. Sansa was unused to people with power being so uninterested in credit or recognition. Even Marjorie only helped the poor because of the recognition. For all she thought Marjorie did care in her own way, her actions were for herself. Jon made a low sound. Couldn't her goals be what she said they are? Maybe I'm foolish, but she's done what she said she'd do. Build a beacon between worlds. Sansa had seen some of the notes from Cran. Whatever Fitz was doing was beyond her comprehension, as well as that of Wolkins. She said she was paying us back for our hospitality. She looked at Jon. The free folk kidnap their brides, don't they? Jon blinked at the change in topic. Yes, what would one of them think of a crown of flowers? She had a feeling she'd found an answer she'd been looking for. He seemed to catch on as well, his lips twitching. They'd think it foolish. You think she doesn't mean it as a courting gift because it's not her people's way? I believe I need to speak to our god. Sansa stood. Jon stood as well. Sansa, if you're wrong. If she means it, she hasn't taken offense at anything short of being called a forgin, murderous whore. Sansa was still baffled by the Grachan's survival. And Lord Umber still lives, bruised and a broken arm. But he still draws breath. He looked like he wanted to wrap her in a blanket and keep her from the whole world outside of the room. I could come with you. Thank you. But no. Sansa smiled softly at her brother. You'll need to hunt down Rickon. Jon huffed. Aye, he'll have escaped his lessons by now. Sansa raised her hand and knocked on the door of their divine guest's chamber door. Come in, came the muffled reply. Sansa entered the room and her face flushed. Even the most daring of court ladies from the Reach and Dorne covered more skin than Daisy was showing. She shut the door behind her, her years in court the only reason she wasn't the color of an apple. If you're indisposed, I can come back later. Daisy's eyes were closed as she moved in a slow series of deliberate movements. Her garb was strange. They must be the undergarments of the clothing she'd been wearing when she arrived, because Sansa had never heard of, let alone seen clothing that stretched how this fabric did. Her breasts were covered by a tight black garment that covered them, and little else, thick straps over her shoulders. Clearly some form of support. Her legs were a type of trouser perhaps. They could have been painted on, however, the legs ending mid-calf. The lack of clothing wasn't what Sansa noticed outside of a brief shock at it. It was the scars. The woman was a tapestry of silvery white and bumped skin from past injuries. You're fine, Daisy spoke. Her eyes remained closed. Did you need something? Sansa swallowed her embarrassment and disquiet. I wish to ask you a question. If you were amenable to such a thing? Daisy's eyes opened. She must have seen something on Sansa's face because she lowered her arms, her strange movement stopping. All right. She stepped towards the fire and lifted a kettle of water off and carried it to the side table. She poured the water into a clay mug. Tea. Please. Sansa had a feeling this conversation was going to take a while, especially since she hadn't settled on how careful she should be with her words. Daisy hummed and filled a second mug before carefully lifting a strainer with leaves in it. As she prepared the tea, Sansa took in the room. Of course she knew what to expect, but it was interesting to see what her guest had done to these rooms in her time here. The answer wasn't much. Everything was neat. You could hardly tell there was a person staying within them. The clothing the god likely meant to wear later was laid neatly on the bed. There were several containers of what seemed to be tea, a wash basin sitting by the small mirror. Laying neatly on top of the chest were the strange gauntlets she'd been wearing when she'd first appeared. You have no idea how awesome it is you have tea here. I'd kill for some coffee, but tea's good too. She held out the second cup to Sansa. She accepted the warm cup. Thank you. Sansa considered the causal body language. You've never spent much time in a royal court, have you? More like no time, Daisy scoffed, set her tea down while grabbing the white shirt, laying on her bed and pulling it on over her head. Not that this whole thing isn't super interesting, but not my thing. She waved at herself. Sorry if I made you uncomfortable. You guys are way more conservative about your clothing. Sansa raised a brow. You typically wear small clothes in public? Oh no, she laughed. But cramped living quarters and regular expected time in the gym, communal showers. Daisy shrugged. And these aren't my underwear or small clothes. They're workout gear, meant to not keep heat in when you're training. Also not get gross with sweat. Sansa sipped at the tea to avoid saying something stupid at that thought. I saw the brooches you had made for your followers. Oh, good. Daisy picked up her tea with a slight smile. Do you think they'll work? Of course the boys aren't trained enough for much of anything yet, but you know once they've gotten a bit better. Sansa had a feeling she'd been right to come here in that moment. Are you courting me? Daisy chalked on her tea, her eyes wide. What? She was paying full attention to Sansa now, as she wheezed. No, I mean not that you're not great. Very crush-worthy. Really, you've got the whole intelligent woman in power thing going on. But, not what I was going for. So you're unaware that's what your actions appear to be? Sansa inquired, mostly amused now as a weight lifted off of her shoulders. She wasn't dealing with the interest from a person she couldn't say no to, which was a terrifying situation. One she'd been living with for years now. To actually be free of it was... She'd think of it later. That'd be a no. Daisy set her tea aside, crossing her arms. How am I courting you? Sansa's fingers were warmed by the cup in her hands. You outrank everyone. Her voice was even as she explained, keeping careful focus on the woman to ensure she wasn't taking offense at it. If you were a sworn sword like Brienne, it would be to be expected. I'd likely have awarded you a title for the taking of the Dreadfort. Wait, but shouldn't I be expected to, I don't know, make some gesture, something more than just helping? She raised a brow. You've ruined my enemies, brought back the entire contents of one of the great fortresses of the north. You're dedicating your own religious order to me. There is hardly a grander gesture to be had. You bowed to me. And that means I'm courting you? Daisy asked slowly. There are very few reasons for deferring to someone who you outrank as completely as you outrank every human in the world. Sansa saw understanding dawning on the woman's face. Oh, Daisy blinked. How do I fix it? Because I'm going to take a wild stab in the dark that having a woman romantically pursuing you isn't a good thing in this world? Sansa wasn't sure how to feel about the easy acceptance and immediate offer of help. It was not what she'd come to expect, though perhaps with Daisy she should. Typically, no. However, if you were considered interested, only a fool would attempt to make a proposal. And you'd like to not get married just a couple of months after everything. Daisy just looked understanding. She nodded, lifting her teacup again and sitting down on top of the trunk of clothing at the foot of her bed. How far do you want to take it? She paused. Take it? Well, I can just keep what I'm doing with some pointers on how not to fuck it up. Daisy shrugged. But if you want, I'm game for faking a thing. Easiest cover in the business. I think I faked a relationship with half my friends at this point. Fitz still gets grumpy about the train. How the woman managed to be baffling so utterly just constantly was... What? If a young couple showed up looking to start a new life, would you pay more or less attention to them than a single new person come to make a new start? Daisy asked, cocking an eyebrow. Sansa paused. The couple. Exactly, Daisy grinned. So, if you want to scandalize everyone, I'm totes game. She opened and then shut her mouth. That won't be necessary. Her mouth twitched upwards, though it would be amusing. Daisy laughed, leaning back, her elbows resting on the end of the bed. The sheer casualness of it confusing, but reassuring. So, what do I need to know? Sansa paused as it clicked. You're bored. So bored, Daisy agreed immediately. I don't think I've just... It's weird. Which means I'm so down for whatever. Her head cocked to one side, a slight frown on her face. She held up a finger as she stood, staring at the wall next to the window curiously. Stepping to the window, the latch unhooked without being touched and opened as Daisy half lunged out of it, arm reaching out. She grabbed and hauled a very familiar-looking person into the room. Rickon rolled across the floor. As he looked up, his lips pulled back as he scrambled to his feet. He blinked, the half-snarl falling off his face as he spotted Sansa's expression. Daisy laughed. Hi. Rickon, Sansa barely resisted grabbing him by the ear. Climbing and listening to conversations that don't involve you is unacceptable. What did you think you were doing? Rickon sat on the ground, his legs crossed as he faced his very displeased sister and her apparent god. He was still unsure about that, even if she didn't smell human. He knew the old gods, and they weren't whatever she was. They were the wind in the leaves, the water in the earth, the creak of the trees, not a walking, talking creature like this, Daisy. His eyes flicked away from the creature to his sister. I was just making sure you were okay. You can't climb like that, especially with it getting colder. Once there's ice on the walls, you could slip. Don't you remember Bran's fall? There was a strange stiffness to Sansa as if she was restraining herself. It was odd to his eyes, like a hunter waiting, poised to strike, but hesitating yet not that at the same time. His jaw set mullishly. Yes, but he was pushed. Rickon, you're important, rightful Lord of Winterfell. Sansa lowered into a crouch before him, her dress pulled out around her. Her back easily open to the creature behind her, but her eyes kept Rickon's attention on her. But more than that, you're my brother. I can't protect you if you don't let me. And climbing like that is reckless and dangerous. I can't stop a rock from falling or ice forming. He crossed his arms. How am I supposed to watch you if I don't? You're all secrets and saying stuff weird. And I don't know what she is, but she's not human. He jerked his chin at Daisy. If you had asked, I would have told you what I could. She held his gaze. We are surrounded by enemies. And to survive, we have to do things we don't want to do. But we can't be fighting each other as well, or insulting our allies. She gave a pointed gesture towards Daisy. Rickon wiggled slightly. He understood what she wanted. His eyes flicked to the creature. Sorry, no harm done, kid. Daisy smiled. And your wolf can smell I'm different, can it? He nodded. You smell off, like it burns slightly, but you're not a god. I know the old gods and you're not them. No, I'm not. She grabbed her clothing off the foot of her bed and stepped towards the side door into the solar off the guest chambers. I'm going to go get dressed all the way. Don't worry about finding someplace else to talk. She shrugged. Sansa looked fully at the creature. Person, thank you. It's very kind of you. It's your castle, Daisy waved off and then left the room. The door closing behind her, Sansa turned back to him and sighed. Join me? She straightened. Her movements elegant in a way he didn't even remember Mother being. He gave a jerk of a nod and then climbed to his feet and followed his sister to the wooden table and chairs by the window he had been hanging on outside of. Slipping into the chair, he looked at her guiltily. I'm sorry. Do you understand what is happening? Sansa looked at him, her gaze measuring, though not unkind. Rickon swallowed. It was a test. Like when Osha had left the hunting to him and Shaggy Dog. You retook the north. His words were slow. Our bannermen found me and Osha. The Lannisters will attack to try and kill us, how they killed Robb and Mum. And the dead are coming. It's not safe anywhere, really. But the bannermen are loyal. You and Jon are going to fight the dead. That's true. Sansa reached out, taking his hand. You're the only surviving legitimate son of fathers left. We don't know if Bran's still alive, which makes you the Stark of Winterfell. The North is yours by right. One day, when you are a few years older, the North will be yours. But our position is weak right now. We need to secure the North if we mean to survive. Our bannermen are loyal because our house made them loyal. They won't follow a weak house. He felt a sick feeling in his gut, and we're weak. Until they choose us, once more, as their liege lords, we are vulnerable. Sansa squeezed his hand. I know we don't know each other anymore. Not really, but we're family. And that means something. Rickon felt a sick turning in his gut. This was familiar to words about duty and honor that Robb had spoken, and Father and everyone in his vague memories of early childhood when he'd had a home. You're leaving. I am. Not for long. She looked terribly sad, but unshakable. It's necessary if we want to survive, and you will stay here. There must always be a Stark in Winterfell, and you're too young to go to war. He shook his head. No, you can't leave me. I won't stay. You'll die and I'll be alone again. Rick and Sansa breathed in, her calm not cracking, her sorrow merely deepening. I will do everything in my power to come back. Jon will too, but if we don't do this, we'll never be safe. I need you to be strong. I know it's terrifying, and Winterfell doesn't feel like home, but I need you to be a Stark, and to do your duty no matter how much we might not want to. Her words rung something in his chest like a gong. He knew he was a Stark, even scrambling over stones in the skin of shaggy dog he'd known. Oroza wouldn't let him forget. His bones wouldn't let him forget. He hated it. Breen saw the ocean come and drowned Winterfell, and then left, leaving it to burn. We were hungry and cold and lost. And then Bran left. I was supposed to protect him, but he sent me away, and now you're leaving. It's not right. No, it's not. Sansa cupped his cheek with her hand. But it's necessary. She pulled back, her eyes releasing him. Lord Manderly and Lord Umber will run Winterfell while I'm gone. Osha will be here to care for you, and I'm leaving Brienne to make sure you don't try to sneak out and follow us. He crossed his arms, leaning back in the chair. The big lady knight wouldn't let him go anywhere, and he doubted Osha would help him escape. I could help. I'm a wolf. You're a warg. Sansa said the word warg cautiously, like it was a term she was still accepting or learning. And a boy. When the long night comes, we'll all have to fight. Even you. But it's not here quite yet. Rickon's frown deepened. You can't protect me. No one can protect anyone. Not completely. Sansa's face turned cold as she pulled back the rest of the way. But I won't bring you to war and our enemy's doorstep. And her voice was unwavering now. It reminded him of his vague recollection of their father. He bit at the inside of his lip. He wanted to rage and cry about how it wasn't fair, but he knew it wouldn't do any good. You have to come back. I'll do everything I can to do so. Her face softened slightly. I'll be with Jon in whatever days he is. Rickon looked through his curls at her. She's not human, but she's not a god. I'm beginning to understand that. Sansa paused before continuing. Now, will you eat with Jon and I before we leave tomorrow? I would like to learn who you are now. Rickon felt an ache at that. I want to know you too. And he did. She was a ghost, returned alive. Only she was different than he remembered, more like his faint memories of their parents than of his memories of her, but colder, sharper than they'd ever been. She was more wolf than either of their parents had ever been. And he understood wolves. And maybe he was starting to understand the strange creature that was his sister.